Hey everyone, while this might be an off week for us at Quiet the Clock as we take a break for holidays and regroup and reset and come back even better for season 3, it doesn't have to be an off week for you. I invite you to revisit one of our very first episodes with Dr. Anate Brauer. It's an amazing, informative episode. She talks about egg freezing, explains the process. I share about my egg freezing journey. It's a really incredible episode. So if you haven't listened to it, or if you have, check it out again. It's a really great listen. If you have any questions about egg freezing, please leave a comment on our YouTube channel. We're happy to get back to you and answer any of those, or DM us on Instagram at Quiet the Clock Pod. We're always here to be helpful and supportive and answer any questions that you have. And fun fact, we will be having Dr. Anate Brauer back on to share with us what happens after the egg freezing process if you choose to go back and use them. So enjoy this episode, this revisit episode, and stay tuned for season 3 of Quiet the Clock.
There's always a way to build a family.
Yeah.
If you want to be a mom, you're going to be a mom.
So that's such a reassuring statement.
Yes,
I love that.
You just have to know that, and then everything else is just wading through the bullshit of getting
I love that.
to the being a mom
I love that
part. And it may not be in the way that you imagine. It may be a circuitous path, but you will get there.
Welcome back. We are joined again with Anate Brauer for part 2 of my conversation with her. If you missed part 1, please go back because there was so much incredible information and I feel like I could sit and talk to her for hours upon hours and hours. So I'm so grateful. I learned a lot through our last conversation and I wanted to use this episode to jump more into sort of the emotional component. And you did bring up a lot of things I want to dive into about that. And I want to learn more about how you see therapy as a part of this process. How might you integrate therapy at Shady Groves? If you could talk more to that, I'd love to hear.
Sure, absolutely. I think 90% of this battle is mental and emotional, honestly. Yes, there's a physical component. Obviously, you're injecting yourself, you're having an egg retrieval, you're coming in for appointments. But 90% is really what's going on up here. And it's really interesting. I think when we first talked, we talked about the emotional aspects. And I'm curious to get your view on this, on what you see.
Yeah.
But I do find that the mental health journey of my egg freezers is very different than the mental health journey of my patients going through IVF.
Yeah, we did talk about that on our initial phone call.
And so I find that my elective egg freezers, my egg freezers that are doing it because they just want to put something in the freezer for the future, what I find in them is more of a feeling of, empowerment, and they seem happier to me. They seem to have less side effects to me. They seem to have less pain to me versus my IVF patients who there's so much at stake for them. Like their families are, dangling by a thread. Their marriages sometimes are dangling by a thread.
I get that.
And so I find that interesting. Obviously, the other component of my egg freezing patients, so my patients who are doing it because they have cancer or endometriosis, that's a much harder journey for those patients. So I do feel like mental health is such a big part of what we do, and I still find it very lacking.
Really?
Yes. So, for example, in our, SGF in Rockville, which is where you know Sharon from, it's a huge, 50,000 square foot space, and there's a wellness center, and you can go there to see your therapist and all of those things. In New York, it's a little bit different. We still have a big space. It's a 15,000 square foot space, and we still have our network of psychologists that we send to, and now I'm going to send to you. I feel like there's so much choice in New York, and that makes things even a little bit harder sometimes.
Absolutely. I think even just if it's just a therapeutic journey, not coupled with egg freezing, it's very overwhelming to find a therapist. And I did want to mention something that I gathered from, and I want to share with the audience that I think is so important and made me think a lot about the journey of choosing a therapist. But hearing everything you shared last episode, how important it is to choose the right doctor to do this with, and making sure that it's a right fit. And for me, I can't even remember how I chose Extend, but it was not the experience that you're sharing with me that sounds like you give
your patients. So I did want to circle back and mention that because I think it's so
Right.
important. And I share with every client, I consider myself to be a good therapist, but I might not be a good fit for everybody,
Right.
and be empowered to keep looking until you find someone you feel
Absolutely
really comfortable with.
We're very lucky in New York. I always tell my patients when they ask me, why should I come to you? And I look at them and I say, I'm not in the business of convincing patients to come see me. We are in New York City where there's 22 IVF centers within a few mile
Wow.
radius. I have a lot of amazing colleagues that do exactly what I do. You just have to find someone, that you jive with. And not only the doctor, but the whole experience, the staff, the nurses, and everyone has an off day sometimes.
Sure,
But the general
sure.
kind of experience is really important. And I also feel that my patients going through this, a lot of them are lacking the mental health support. And finances are an issue there, right? I mean, I have so many patients who need care, and a lot of therapists don't take, it's the same thing. Like there's an insurance
Like in my brain, I'm
issue.
like, what can we create?
Yeah,
What can
there's
we do?
there's insurance issues there. There's out-of-pocket costs seem to be skyrocketing even for mental health. It's
That's
hard.
an unfortunate thing too when we think about taking advantage of a vulnerable population. Obviously, with a pandemic,
Yes.
people seeking mental health has also
Right.
skyrocketed.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
I have to imagine, I don't know anything firsthand, luckily, thankfully, that people are leveraging that. I know for myself and for our practice, we were lowering rates. We were just,
Right.
we wanted to help,
To
and
increase
we always
access.
work with clients on that.
And I'm curious, I see it from my perspective of what I feel like my egg freezers are feeling like. What do you see in your...
Well, I can share with you both. I can
Yes.
share with you my own personal experience, what I felt, and I can share with you what some of my clients feel or what some of my friends feel.
Yeah.
For me personally, hearing you say the word empowered was not how I felt. I felt quite opposite. I felt out of control. I felt very angry. But I think I wasn't doing it alone. I was doing it in a relationship. Right. And that's one thing I want us to touch on because we didn't, embryos versus eggs. But
Yes, that's a big
think
topic.
my experience did not feel empowering because of my personal situation, that being in a relationship with someone whose timing was not aligning. When I went to, I think it was Extend or the other fertility doctor I went to suggested embryos, and I brought that to Rob, and he was not on board for that. But I also didn't have a doctor, and I definitely want your take on that. I know what it is because you've shared it with me, but I want you to share it with the audience. I didn't have anyone saying, it's okay, do eggs. That's the better decision at this point.
When in doubt, freeze eggs.
Yeah. So me personally, emotionally did not feel, and I've shared this on the solo episodes, I didn't feel empowered. I felt so angry. I felt so sad. I felt resentful. I felt unfairly towards him. That's where I placed all of that. For other women that are single, I think there's both, and trying to hold space for both, feeling empowered, but also feeling angry and frustrated. And I think a lot of women that sit in that camp, it's because they're really disappointed in dating. They're disappointed in men. They're disappointed that they don't have partnerships. So I think for a lot of women, at least myself and the ones I've spoken to, it's a range of things. Yeah. And that's what's been so fascinating, incredible about, everyone being vulnerable and sharing their stories. You hear all of it. I can have one call and they're like, I feel empowered. I'm claiming my future. I have this insurance. And then you get on a call with somebody else or have a conversation and with someone else and they're like, I'm angry. I'm pissed. So it's a range. And that's why I think I'm a therapist. I believe in this wholeheartedly, but I think having that component is so significant. I think having a doctor you feel comfortable with to help with that emotional component is so significant.
Absolutely. The eggs versus embryos question, just to talk about it briefly from a medical perspective, the benefits of freezing eggs is that eggs are completely autonomous. So you retrieve them, you put them in the freezer, they're yours, nobody can tell you what to do with them. An embryo means you take the egg, you fertilize it with sperm, you can grow it out to an entity called a blastocyst, and you can test that blastocyst for its genetics. Remember, I said in the previous episode, when you're 30 to 34, around half your eggs are chromosomally abnormal. By the time you're 38, 80% are abnormal. By the time you're 40, 90% are abnormal. So you can actually test embryos for their genetics. You cannot test eggs for their genetics. And so with eggs, you're really hedging your bets at how many eggs you need in the freezer to make a baby. With an embryo, if you have a chromosomally normal embryo, you have 60% chance of taking a baby from that. The problem with freezing embryos is that now your eggs are combined with someone else's sperm. Your insurance policy is tied to another person.
Yeah.
That is a really important thing, right? And so when people ask me, well, which is better? I say, well, embryos are better if you want to test their genetics. Like if you're a little bit older and you can't get 40 eggs in the freezer, you just want to know what you have.
Yeah.
But I feel like the downside of having an embryo versus egg, meaning not having autonomy, and you see this all the time.
We were talking about with, yes,
I wrote most recently was from Pitch Perfect.
Anna
Kendrick, right? She talked about this. I created embryos with my ex. You know, it was a terrible idea.
Yeah, we brought up Sofia Vergara.
I mean, but this is what happens. And so this isn't just my single patients coming to me, you know, who are this is my married patients
Sure.
Exactly what you're describing. Their partners aren't ready. Let me put something in the freezer and see if it gets better after that. And sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't. And so my view on that is, you know, when in doubt, freeze eggs. But it does bring resentment because in the back of your head, you're like, well, what if they don't work? And this is my policy and I'm being forced to do this because the person who I want to build a family with
That's what it feels
ready.
like. You're cornered, you're for. Or that's how I'll speak for myself. That's how I felt for sure. Yeah.
And then women are taking the brunt of this because for some reason, you know, gametes, we want to be created equal, but like all gametes for some reason are not created equal. Meaning when you think about things like the words donor sperm don't evoke such a feeling of stigma and controversy as the word donor egg.
Right.
I mean, think about that.
Well, and I think that's the other emotional piece that comes up, right,
Yeah.
is failure, right?
Yes.
Whether it's you have to use, or you're in a situation where you decide to use a donor egg, or
Right.
I know specifically to egg freezing, you know, if you don't get a certain number that is deemed good,
Yes.
you feel like your body has failed you.
Right. But men make new sperm every 3 months. It's like they don't have to live and die by these numbers.
No, and
so,
that's the burden on women.
Yes.
Physically, financially. I know we're talking more about the emotional piece, but emotionally, like women think about this stuff. I know I thought about it a lot. It weighed on me a lot. It made me turn into kind of a crazy person at points. And I feel like in a lot of ways, men can kind of just not think about it, not worry about it.
No, it's true. And so for all of those reasons, I think everyone should be hooked in with mental health for this process.
Yeah.
I mean, your doctor, I promise you, wants to be there for you more than he or she even is. But that doctor, unfortunately, sometimes doesn't have the time to give you what you need from an emotional perspective.
Yes.
Not because it's that doctor's fault, but because that doctor is, you know, scrubbed in surgeries and seeing new patients.
Right.
It's not enough for any of these things to rely just on one person. You know, later today I'm doing a live with an acupuncturist, right? And I talk about acupuncture and that's another avenue or another person for that patient to talk to, right? It's all about support.
Yeah.
So I think the best way to get support is to have a therapist, to have someone that it's great to have friends and whatever, but to have an objective person with you, kind of that you can talk to.
Yeah, and I think egg freezing or not, friendships are well-meaning mostly and well-intentioned, but we're going to talk about friendship and sort of the impact on that during this process. Or some friends just can't relate because they're not in this position that they're married or they have children. And again, well-intentioned, but you know, I know for me personally, sometimes that was really hard because I'm like, you don't get it. Like telling me to stay positive or all these things will happen. It's like, you know, when you're in that low emotional state, you're kind of like, screw off.
Yeah, exactly. But, you know, I don't think there's enough of an emphasis placed on mental health in this, specifically in the area of egg freezing. I think with IVF, we talk about it a lot. I think with our egg freezing population, it's a different discussion.
I mean, this is why I'm here. I think it is so necessary because I think a lot of times, you know, outsiders or even some women's experience might be this like empowerment. This is so great. I have control. I'm reclaiming. For a lot of women, it's not that. It's really quite devastating and upsetting. So so this is really kind of the intention and purpose
absolutely.
of this. One thing I wanted to touch on too was you brought up earlier in last episode, achievement. And what everyone will hear if you tune into this podcast is every woman on here is incredible, incredibly accomplished, incredibly ambitious, incredibly motivated. So I think that's another emotional piece that is hard to reconcile is that I set a goal I'm going to go get it.
Yep.
And these women have achieved incredible goals, and you'll learn about them. But this is the one thing where the achievement doesn't line up.
And that's the hardest part of what we do. And I was just talking about this to a patient of mine who happens to also be a friend of mine, who is a very successful entrepreneur. She's not freezing eggs. She's undergoing IVF for a second child. But this is what I see, at the end of the day, every woman I see on the Upper East Side of New York is extremely successful. And if she has done this, and this, she's achieved what she wanted. She got the piece of paper. She got the job. She got the promotion. And we don't have, it's the lack of control and the uncertainty.
Yes, 100%.
That is just so hard to wrap your brain around.
In most other aspects of your life,
right,
where you have the control and
Absolutely.
you have the certainty, or at least you have the direction and the clarity on, if I do X, I will get Y.
Yes.
And that's been a lot of narratives that I heard. I have all of this, but I don't have this.
And, and I experienced this for myself when I was a fellow, and I don't know if I went into the details of this in the last episode, but here I am, not even thinking about having kids, sitting on the birth control pill, thinking I'm just going to wait till I'm 35 to have kids. And then this new test comes out, AMH, that I get drawn to. Oh, there's this new test. You and your co-fellow, let's just get it done. Let's do it. And then and I find out mine is low, and I sit in the fellow's office for the next week crying, saying, I just threw my whole life in the garbage. I literally spent my whole 20s and the beginning of my 30s dedicated to helping other women.
Yep.
And what am I doing? And then the guilt that's compounding because I have a partner who oppositely, was ready for kids. You know what I mean? And so, what am I doing to him in his life? I mean, all of these things and of why is this my number? And I'm sure there's a way I can improve it. In the musical that I was talking to you about, that I consulted on, there's a song that's called I Can Do Better.
That is such a strong narrative.
And the woman, the lead, found out that her AMH was low. And the whole song is about, okay, no problem. Tell me what to do. What do I take? What supplements do I do? What exercise do I do? What food do I eat? And you can't, right? You just can't control that.
You can't,
and that is something
fix it.
That's very, very hard to wrap your brain around.
So hard. That was a challenge for me too. And the guilt piece of, or what you said earlier about throwing my whole life away, like this regret, right? You get to like 34, 35, for me not thinking, and I think for a lot of women, not just thinking like, okay, when I'm ready, I'll meet a partner, I'll have a baby, and not thinking through all of these things, or just life happening or evolving in a very different way than you saw.
Absolutely.
And then feeling like I wasted time. I should have been doing this. I should have been dating more. These are all the emotions, that the guilt, the regret, the what ifs, or I should have done this differently.
Yeah. And by the way, it doesn't go away.
No.
Once you have a child.
It does not.
And there's a lot of research looking at patients with infertility and anxiety and depression. And you would think for some patients it's very situational. Like once you get the baby, everything's going to be fine. But there's guilt involved there too, because being a parent is hard. And you worked really hard to have this child, And so there's just so many mental health aspects to what we do. I mean, I commend you for what you do.
Oh, thank you. I commend you for what you do. Yeah, I think there's a lot of work to rewrite some of these narratives that perpetuate guilt and regret. And I think, really empowering women to whatever their journey is and whatever their story is, to embrace it, to be proud of it and to celebrate it. And it's really my hope with this.
The one thing that why I love what I do, there's always a way to build a family.
Yeah.
If you want to be a mom, you're going to be a mom.
So that's such a reassuring statement. I love that.
You just have to know that, and then everything else is just waiting through the bullshit of getting
I love that.
to the being a mom
I love that.
part, you know? And it may not be in the way that you imagine. It may be a circuitous path, but you will get there.
Yeah,
eventually.
and I think that's it, right? Staying open to how life is going to evolve. And more times than not, it doesn't look like the way that we had planned it out to be.
Like everything in life.
Yeah, everything. Well, I just want you, I thank you again so much for being
Absolutely.
here. So grateful. If you could just share with the audience kind of where to find you. I want to link all the things that you shared today, like the play, but where can they find you?
Sure.
Because you're incredible.
Thank you. Again, my name is Dr. Anate Brauer. You can find me on our website, which is www.shadygrowfertility.com. You can also find me on Instagram. It's at Dr. Anate Brauer. I just look so forward to hearing all of your podcast episodes.
And I'd love to have you back. And hopefully this is a success
amazing.
and appreciated by, this audience and
Absolutely.
is helpful. We'd love to have you back.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thanks.